Good morning, Northeast. My name is Todd Findley, and I'm here to give you the announcements virtually, maybe for the last time. That's because we are excited to announce that starting next Sunday, January 17th, Northeast is going to resume its in-building services for one service at 10 a.m. For those of you who aren't comfortable yet meeting in person, don't worry, we're still going to have those live streamed. But if you are interested in joining us for the gathering, be on the lookout for an email coming this week or a Facebook post that will be posted giving you more information on how to RSVP. We'll need to know how many adults and children will be attending so that we make sure that we have enough space for everybody to be accommodated with appropriate social distancing. If you are not on our email list, send us an email and let us know. neadmin@nefw.org. Let us know your email address and we'll make sure that you are up to date with everything that's going on at Northeast. For now, we will not be having our children's ministry going, but we do plan on starting that back up on February the 7th. We'll need RSVPs for that as well so that we have everything planned out for the little people. But let us know who you might have coming and be on the lookout for emails concerning that as well. So meeting in person again means that we got to start ramping up our Sunday morning service team. If you are interested in helping out as either a greeter or working in the tech booth, that's those people in the back who do the sound and the video and the funny pictures that Tony sometimes puts up on the screen, then let us know that as well. Send an email to neadmin@nefw.org and we'll figure out how to get you working in one of those capacities. Good to see everybody. Hope to see you in the sanctuary real soon. Bye.
Hey, my brothers and sisters, good morning. If you are watching this in the morning, good afternoon if that's when you're taking this in. And if for some reason you're watching this in the middle of the night, then I hope that somehow it makes you fall asleep. As you may remember, we as a church, in the first part of 2020, before the pandemic hit, we were making our way through the book of Acts in a series that we called Movement. And I want you to know that next week, our plan and our hope is to gather together back in our building to worship our God together for those who are able and willing. And of course, we'll be live streaming for those who choose to worship together in that way. And when we meet together, our plan is to restart that series through the book of Acts. And today is kind of a prelude to that. And the starting point for the message today is that this past Wednesday, January 6th, was something called the Feast of the Epiphany. And if you're like me, the tradition of the church calendar is something that has been pretty foreign to me. The stream of the Jesus movement that I have spent most of my life in has not really emphasized these kinds of traditions like the church calendar. But what I've been learning over these past years now is that we can actually learn a lot and even grow a lot in Jesus by engaging in some of these traditions that the Spirit of God has birthed in previous generations of the church in different parts of the world. And so this past Wednesday was an important date on the church calendar called the Feast of the Epiphany. And Epiphany comes from the Greek word epiphania, which means something like to make manifest or to appear or to reveal. Paul uses it when he writes to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 10. He says, God's grace has now been revealed through the appearing, through the manifestation or the revelation of our Savior, King Jesus. He then uses it 5 times in his other writings to talk about the appearing or manifestation of Jesus one day in the future when he returns. And in part of the Western church, throughout the generations, going clear back to the 3rd or 4th century, January 6th has been the Feast of the Epiphany, or sometimes called Three Kings Day. And traditionally, it has been a day set aside to remember and celebrate the first time Jesus was made manifest to the nations, to the non-Jewish world, specifically to those magi that we read about in Matthew chapter 2. A scene sometimes called the adoration of the Magi, the adoration or the worship by the Magi of King Jesus, which has been represented by just all kinds of artwork throughout the years. Coming up on your screen, you'll see an example of one of these. It's actually called The Adoration of the Magi by an artist named Fabriano from the year 1423, which is pretty amazing. And the next one is a piece of art by a man named Gerard David, who created this in the year 1515. The next one is by a famous artist that you've heard of, Rembrandt, and he created this around the year 1632. And then the last one is really moving to me for some reason. It was found on a sarcophagus that is dated back to the 4th century AD. And so both as a way to kind of close the loop on Christmas and as a prelude to our journey together through the book of Acts, let's take some moments here today to focus in on this story in Matthew chapter 2. And as we do, church, we want to allow this text and the example of those magi to shape us and move us. And specifically, my brothers and sisters, I want to highlight for us their attentiveness. The attentiveness of the magi. The ancient Jewish sages said that the scriptures are like a diamond. And like a diamond, as we hold them up and look at them from different angles, the light reflects and refracts in different ways. In other words, we see, as we look at it from different angles, we see different things. And so today, let's look at this sacred and true story in the scriptures from the angle of the attentiveness of the Magi to what God was doing, to his epiphanies, if you will. Because, church, I believe it was the attentiveness of the Magi that led to the adoration of the Magi. Matthew chapter 2. Starting in verse 1, Matthew writes, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, so this could have been a day after that, like later that day, it could have been up to 2 years later or anywhere in between. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, and they asked, where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. It says, during that time, Magi from the east came to the city of Jerusalem. And we don't know exactly who these strange people were, but we do know that in ancient times, especially in the lands to the east of Israel, there was often a special class of people called Magi, or in the Persian language, something like magus, or even wise men. We actually see them in the scriptures in the book of Daniel, specifically in the book of Daniel, which you might recall. And these magi were, in essence, the priestly class in their society. They were often closely linked to the kings and queens and their family, and so they were considered to be in the royal class. And sometimes, in some places, they were viewed as the kingmakers in their land. In other words, they were the people who decided who the next king would be. And this priestly royal group of people were experts in the mysterious. And they would engage in things like astrology and dream interpretation, like they do in the book of Daniel, and the study of sacred text and the use of magic. In fact, our word magic comes from the same word as the word magi. And as a side note, one of the fun traditions that we have kind of developed as a family over the past 5 or 6 years is every year during Advent, speaking of the church calendar, every year during Advent, we read one from a series of these books for children. You can see an example of one coming up on the screen. And each of these books in the series has a child as the main character, and you just read day by day and follow them along on an adventure that leads up to the birth of King Jesus. One of them is called Jotham's Journey. Another one is called Bartholomew's Adventure. Another one is Tabitha's Travels. And this year we read from the one that you see there on the screen called Ishtar's Odyssey, which is a creative story about a boy who was part of this very group of magi from the east. And as a side note to the side note, this seems like a good opportunity to illustrate this concept of attentiveness. You see, some days during Advent, when we read the story, we were just all locked in and attentive as a family. The kids were all quietly listening and tracking along with the story. And for me, rather than just kind of reading the words while thinking about something else, I too was just into it. And so some days we had this high level of attentiveness. And y'all, So, some days we did not. Some days there was like one kid doing somersaults and another kid gazing off into the distance and a third kid poking the fourth kid and the fourth kid beginning to cry and yell and fight back. All the while I was reading the words and ignoring what was happening and not even paying attention to the story itself. There was not much attentiveness happening on those days. Anyway, here in the text, we're not told much about these magi. And we actually are not told anything about how they knew about this king who was coming. However, there is some good speculation that it might be somehow connected to Daniel, remember in the book of Daniel, to Daniel being in the east, the land in the east, in Babylon and then in Persia. In fact, in Daniel chapter 2, it says that at one point, Daniel was placed in charge of all of the wise men. Daniel chapter 2, verse 48. And keep in mind that Daniel would have known the wonderful prophecies that God had spoken to the Hebrew prophets, these strange and wonderful prophecies about the coming of a king who would change everything. Like Isaiah chapter 9 that talks about a child to be born. A son to be given, a child who would become king and who would reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with righteousness and justice from that time on and forevermore. Daniel would have known those prophecies, that prophecy. He would have probably shared those prophecies, and then at least it seems, perhaps, some of these magi handed those prophetic words down from generation to generation so that when that star appeared in the sky, it somehow signaled to them that the time had come and that the prophecies were coming true. Notice what they ask when they entered the city of Jerusalem. They said, "Where is the one who is born?" Almost right from the words of Isaiah. Where is the one who is born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. And my brothers and sisters, let's just pause right here and let's recognize the Epiphany. You see, what the scriptures reveal to us is that God, the creator God, the great being we call God, is not some kind of far-off deity who created and cranked up this machine of a world and is now just kind of sitting back and watching it from a distance. No, the scriptures reveal and they proclaim a God who is active. A God who is so very active, who speaks and moves and who manifests himself and his kingdom all of the time in so many ways. It's like there's this ongoing symphony of epiphanies taking place all of the time. I mean, just think about this one particular story here. God inspired a human being named Isaiah to speak some prophetic words about a king. God then guided some person or some people to write down Isaiah's words and then to pass it along from generation to generation to generation. And then years later, he rose up Daniel. When his people were in exile to the east of Israel, he rose up Daniel in this foreign land to a place of influence. And then he guided Daniel to share these prophetic words. And somehow then he guided these magi, at least some of them, to hold on to these prophetic words for generations. And God made this star appear. And let's just be really honest and recognize that this is so very strange. I mean, this is like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, Chronicles of Narnia type strange. But we believe that it's true and that it happened and that God's epiphanies are not limited by our understanding of science or by our expectations or by our imaginations. Here we see that God caused some kind of bright light to appear in the sky. It could have been a star, could have been a convergence of planets, it could have been an angelic being, or it could have just been his Shekinah glory. We do not know what it was, but what we do know is that it was strange and wonderful, and God did it. God made manifest. He made manifest these prophetic words or some kind of prophetic words that we don't know about, and he made manifest this star. And here's the thing. Those magi were attentive to it. I mean, really with the deck stacked against them in so many ways. I mean, they were foreigners to these promises and prophecies. They were hundreds of miles away. They were generations removed from Daniel or whatever else was going on there. Basically, all they had was a bright light in the sky to lead the way. Yet they were somehow attentive to what God was doing. So much so that when the star appeared, they packed their bags. They gathered their attendants and guards, which would have been a group of anywhere between 50 clear up to 1,000 people. They got their camels and their caravans, and they traveled an estimated 800 miles in part through the desert all the way to the city of Jerusalem just to worship this newborn king. And it says, verse 3, when King Herod heard this, he was disturbed. And all Jerusalem with him. I mean, no kidding, a caravan of anywhere between 50 to 1,000 people entering the city with these special royal kingmaker magi along with them. I mean, of course, all Jerusalem was disturbed. Verse 4 says, when Herod had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah, where the king was to be born. So he was asking about these wonderful prophecies that had been given. They replied, in Bethlehem in Judea, for this is what the prophet Micah has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people. Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him. After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him, the adoration of the Magi. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. And church, this is where we want to allow this text and the example of the Magi to shape us and move us. Again, notice that they were so attentive to what God was doing. And not everybody in the story was, right? Some people in the story responded with resistance to what God was doing, specifically Herod and those in political power. Some people in the story responded with complacency or with distraction. I mean, think about all of those people there in the city of Jerusalem and in the region of Judea, and they could have seen that star. It was in the sky. They had those holy, sacred, prophetic texts, but they were distracted by something. But these Magi, they responded with attentiveness. And their attentiveness led them to adoration. It led them to worship King Jesus. It says they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so let me ask, how is your attentiveness these days? And please know that I'm asking myself this first and foremost. How is your attentiveness to what God is doing and to what God is saying? My brothers and sisters, I know that this is your heart. And this is our heart as a church. This is the kind of posture that we so desperately want to have, this high level of attentiveness to God's epiphanies. And I also know that it is so easy for me and for us to slide into maybe sometimes resistance, but probably more often to some kind of distraction so that we are not paying attention to what God is doing. My daughter Shalom right now has the absolute privilege of playing on a soccer team that is coached by Adam Clark, like the Adam Clark at gmail.com. And Shalom is just, absolutely loving it. And I have to say that I've been so impressed by Adam and his coaching of these kids. And one of the things that I've heard him say a couple times during his halftime speeches to the team is that he wants them to turn up the intensity and effort. He even does this, and he compares it to like turning up the volume on the radio. And he says, team, let's turn up the intensity and effort. And so, church, I guess this is kind of my attempt at an Adam Clark halftime speech today. As it relates to our attentiveness to what God is doing and saying, let's do this. Let's turn up our intensity. By the grace of God and by the power of His Spirit, let's follow the example of these magi and let's turn it up. And of course, there's all kinds of ways that we can do that. I just want to offer up today a couple simple, tangible ways that we can do that we can turn up the intensity toward being more attentive to what God is doing and more attentive to what God is saying. A couple simple, tangible ways that we could do that even this week. And the first one's this: to simply pray, Jesus, enable me to be attentive to what you are doing and saying. To pray something, to get into the practice of praying something like, Jesus, enable me. Jesus, enable this person. Jesus, enable that person. Jesus, enable us to be attentive to what you are doing and to what you are saying. Find a creative way to get into the practice of praying that prayer or something like it. Write it down, print it out, post it somewhere where you will see it. Lean in and pray it a few times in the morning. Pray it in the afternoon. Pray it before bed or whatever it might be as a way to turn up our attentiveness. Let's pray this prayer. Jesus, even now, enable us to be attentive to all that you are doing and all that you are saying. And then a second way to turn up the intensity on our attentiveness to Jesus is to this week read through or listen to the book of Acts. As a way to prepare for the series, but also as a way to turn up our intensity, let's read through it. And as we do, let's hold it like a diamond. Let's hold it like a diamond from the angle of attentiveness to what God is doing. And let's take note of what we see him doing and saying and making manifest in the text. And then let's take note of those same kinds of things that he might be doing around us and among us and within us. Church, let's together turn up our attentiveness. Because what happens when we do that is that our attentiveness leads to adoration. When we see God move in big ways or in small ways, when we hear God's words, when we sense his gentle nudges or whispers, or when we are blown away by star-like epiphanies, it moves us toward worship of our King. It moves us toward crossing a desert, toward bowing down, toward offering valuable gifts, toward obedience, toward packing our bags, toward loading our camels, toward singing, feasting, fasting, going, giving, toward all of it and more. And all of it is worship. All of it is adoration of our King. And that is where we want to be. And so, my brothers and sisters, as we walk that out together, may God bless us and keep us and make his face shine upon us. May he be gracious to us and grant us wisdom and shalom. And may the result of it be that the city of Fort Wayne and the nations of the earth sing for joy. And may the result of all of it be God's glory and honor and praise forever and ever. In the name of King Jesus. And everyone agreed and said, amen.